Push 3 standalone is like 6 times as much as Push 2 on the used market right now, but is it 6 times better? I keep getting asked if Push 3 is that much better than Push 2, what Push 3 does so differently, if it's worth it to even get Push 3. In this video, I'm going to compare Push 2 and Push 3 to see how they stack up against each other and give you the simple steps to easily know if Push 2 or Push 3 is a better fit for you. Hey yo, it's Alex from Meta Music. I'm a musician, producer, and certified audio engineer here to help you make better music and unlock your creativity. So in this video, we're going Push 2, Push 3 head to head. Death match, you know what I'm saying? But before we go there, it's important to talk about why get a push in the first place. Like, what is push? If we really go down the rabbit hole, what is the soul of the push device? What does it bring to the table? Does it fit with you as an artist, as a creator, as a human being? And do you really even need push? If we zoom out and go back in time like 6, 7, 8 years when I first got Ableton, it was because of Push 2. It was the first time that I saw a DAW being controlled as an instrument. I had a close friend that I've known since high school, and he was playing Native Instruments Machine and making all sorts of cool beats. He brought it to my house. He was like uploading all these beats. I'm like, what's going on, man? We both came from the background of playing instruments and being musicians in bands before ever getting into production. And fun fact, we actually used to play in a hardcore metal band together. He played bass, I played guitar. Long time ago. So it was totally a new world for both of us. And instantly, I was curious about my friend's new toy. I was like, what is this thing? You're sampling stuff, you're sampling records, you're making beats. He was like bringing his laptop and machine to the sunroom and making music on the fly. And I was like, whoa, I've never really seen that before. To just see, wow, there's a bunch of other ways you can make music that isn't just coming up with riffs on guitar. I stumbled on Push 2. And I was like, okay, this thing looks crazy. What is it? Push 2 essentially is an ultra integrated controller for Ableton Live designed by Ableton. Okay, but it's more than just a controller. It's also a MIDI instrument, sampler, and sequencer with its pads. All right, so let me give you just a quick demo. Let me go to my overhead here, and I have Push 2 and Push 3. And don't worry, we're gonna talk about the comparisons and the differences here. But essentially, you can start playback, you can stop playback, you can record clips, you can control your devices, you can mix things, you can trigger loops, you can record loops, right? You can control various parts of the software, but on top of all of that, it's also an instrument. So as you can see, all of these pads right now are laid out in a way that is similar to a keyboard, okay? So you're playing a keyboard with pads and it's actually tuned in fourths. Okay, so it's similar to a guitar neck or a bass neck where every string has an offset tuning of fourths, right? So with some practice, you can really play this thing like an instrument. All right, so after seeing people playing this and making music on the fly and jamming with Ableton Live with their guitars and live looping and all this stuff, I was sold. But fast forward, here we are, and suffice to say it totally revolutionized my music making process. Okay, as soon as I got Push 2 and I got into the whole Ableton workflow, game over. It completely changed the way that I make music. So let's go ahead and compare the Push 2 and the Push 3 and see if Push 3 is that much better than Push 2. All right, so let's go ahead and check it out. The first thing to talk about is the build. The size difference between these things is pretty negligible. You're looking at maybe a 1/16 of an inch, 1/4 inch difference. So it's a little bit bigger, the Push 3 that is, right, than the Push 2, but really it looks pretty much the same. One thing to point out is that Push 3 does have little feet underneath it, which keeps it a little bit raised over the surface that you have it on, which I'm guessing is for cooling so that it doesn't overheat, versus Push 2 is pretty flush on the surface. So next, let's talk about the buttons. So the first thing to point out is that I think there's a big difference between the quality of the buttons from Push 2 and Push 3. On Push 2, when you push these buttons, they're indented into the frame of the push, and you really have to kind of dig in there to actually push the button. And it kind of has this weird gummy texture on top, which gets dirty really easily, and it kind of feels a little weird on your finger. It's kind of sticky, and like you really have to push these, and sometimes like you push something but it doesn't actually push the button, so it can be a little frustrating sometimes with those buttons, versus on Push 3 every single button has a satisfying click to it. When you press it, there's a click, and it just very obvious when you press the button, and it feels a lot more sturdy and solid. All right, so the next thing to talk about is the layout of the buttons themselves. And at first glance, it looks pretty similar, but I do think that Push 3 has made some significant upgrades to just where the buttons are laid out logically. Okay, so let me just break down the differences and the similarities first. So first and foremost, the layout of the pads are exactly the same, and all of your display buttons are exactly the same. You have 8 buttons underneath here, you have 8 buttons on top. Same thing goes for Push 3. And then you also have these encoders on top. Notice that on Push 3, we lose this guy and we lose these two, but we gain them in different areas. So we'll talk more about that in just a sec. And then from there, we have our main transport controls. So our play, record, and automate, right? Which this is where the differences start. Here we have play, record, and then automate's a little bit higher. And it makes sense to me to have automate and fixed length and quantize and metronome and tap tempo all kind of grouped together, because these are all functions that you will use while recording, right? Like you're going to quantize things after you've recorded. You're going to tap your tempo before you're recording. You're going to turn on and off your metronome before recording or after recording, whatever. And you'll notice that the new button, which is also very important for when you're jamming out clips and you want to create new clips and stay in flow, is right beside the recording function, as well as the capture, which is a new button, okay? And if we go forward, you'll notice that another big difference here is the top right and the top left buttons on Push 3. So with Push 3, we obviously have more features where we can control live sets, we can get into the settings, the audio inputs, the expression of the pads, the IO, etc. Right? So this makes sense where all of these controls are kind of main settings. This right-hand side shows us device view, our mixer view, it shows us clip view, and it shows us our session view. And then from there, the most notable next difference is essentially the encoder wheels. So on Push, if you go ahead and browse, you can use this encoder, which just feels so much better for browsing. It just feels better in general, versus on Push 2 to browse, you have to hit the browser, and then you have to use these arrows, which feels a little bit more clunky in terms of a workflow. These two encoders, this one would control the tempo, and then this controls the swing. Now we have one knob that controls both the swing and tempo, and this knob feels way better as well. And then we have a separate one for all of the outputs of Push 3, which has its own encoder, because Push 2 doesn't have any outputs. It is only a MIDI controller, versus Push 3 has all sorts of IO. Next, I want to talk about the pads, because the pads are a big deal. So let me go back to the overhead. And essentially, I feel that people overlook this a ton, especially if you're somebody who's looking to play Push like an instrument. If you're playing these pads, like there is a huge difference between the pads on Push 2 and Push 3, like astronomical difference that most people kind of gloss over. They'll be like, oh, the pads on the Push 3 have MPE, and that's pretty much the only difference. No, they feel completely different. And to me, they are perfect for designing and playing expressive instruments, especially the MPE stuff. Like playing these pads feel so much more meaty, you know, so much more anchored. They're so much more sensitive and intuitive and just playable. Like if you play traditional instruments like guitar or piano or even, you know, saxophone, drums, like the higher quality the instrument, the easier and better it will feel to play. And I feel as though Ableton has injected that into Push 3, where this feels so much more like an instrument. They really went for it to make this thing an instrument, which is why I bought it, and it's why it's such a good fit for what I do. Intentionally designing and playing expressive instruments that match your current skill level is the first stage of my entire music making process. It's a whole system designed around streamlining the creative process so you can stay in flow and finish music that you're proud of and continue to discover your unique sound, express yourself artistically, and unlock your creativity. So if you're interested and want to learn more about the workflow wizardry system that I use and teach my clients, click the link below and watch the masterclass. Next, we got to talk about IO, which is another massive difference between Push 2 and Push 3. So if we go back to the overhead here, right, like Push 2 on the back only has power, USB, and 2 pedal ports. Except for the 2 pedal ports, Push 2 and Push 3 share. Everything else that Push 3 has in terms of IO Push 2 does not. So it's a massive difference here. So let's go over it. First of all, it has an audio interface. It has two inputs, okay? It has input 1 and input 2. So you can plug in a guitar, you can plug in a bass, you can plug in a dynamic microphone. All of this stuff can be controlled inside Push 3, and you can record audio, sample stuff directly into Push 3. And on top of that, it has ADAT expandability. It also has MIDI in and out. It also has 4 CV outs if you want to output control voltage and control modular gear. And to me, the standalone functionality is really what takes Push 3 over the top, because it makes it a standalone instrument. Like, you could take this on stage and perform with it straight into a PA, right? You could play along with a band. You could do all this kind of stuff because it's running Ableton directly on it, and it outputs audio. You don't need to have a laptop to use it as an instrument. And finally, let's talk about price, which is another massive area of difference. Push 3 standalone is like $2,500 Canadian, which is like $2,000 US. It is super expensive, but keep in mind, you can get the controller version of Push 3, okay? Which doesn't have the standalone capabilities, but is much cheaper. And to be honest, the Push 3 controller only version is almost the same price that Push 2 was when it came out, give or take a few $100s, right? But it's in the same neighborhood. So depending on your needs, on your budget, or if you want to make the decision if you want a standalone Push 3 or not later, you can opt into getting the controller only version. Now, we've all seen a zillion different fancy videos that hype up cool new gear. We love it, right? And it's awesome, it's fun, new toys, new gadgets, all that kind of stuff. But is this something that you truly want? And more importantly, is this something that you truly need? But first, let me show you what happened when I didn't used to think like this and the change it made when I did. I've bought a lot of plugins, guitars, pedals, fancy gear, MIDI controllers in the past. Okay, and I've mistakenly thought that more stuff would help me make better music. But over time, what I discovered is that once I found tools and instruments that really resonate with me at a deep level, it was easy to start mastering them. And mastery is about depth, not about width. Okay, for example, I've been playing guitar for like 17 years, which has become what you could call an unfair advantage for me because I've gone so deep with a specific thing. Being a musician, an artist, a producer, right? Having a guitar nearby will be a way that I can easily express myself. I found my voice on that instrument, okay? And it's extremely hard to find your voice or find your sound in something if all you do is have a ton of options that you only explore the surface of. Now, Push has just as much depth as a traditional instrument and could totally be what sets you apart as a musician and producer if that's the path you want to go down. The specific tool in question is not really what matters. So it doesn't matter if you use Push in Ableton or not. The key is to find the tools and the instruments that work for you specifically. Okay, so with that said, let's get into the pros and cons of Push 2 and Push 3, compare the two so that you can make a really good decision as to if this would be a good thing for you to have as an artist, a musician, a producer, a creator in general. All right, so let's zero in on Push 2 first and foremost. So first of all, it controls Ableton very similarly to Push 3, okay? It's a workhorse and very logically laid out. I've used it for like 7 years and it's still kicking. All right, so next let's focus on the price, which is a huge pro for Push 2, is that the price is significantly less. And like a Push 2 on the used market is a fraction of the cost of Push 3 standalone, okay? Push 2 on the used market is probably less than half price of the Push 3 controller version even, okay? So it is very affordable to have such integrated and amazing control of Ableton as well as the capabilities of what Push is. One of the cons is that Push 2 could be discontinued, meaning that Ableton might not continue to support it with updates as they continue to upgrade live, etc. The workflow can be a little bit clunky, I'll be honest, with the buttons, and sometimes the pads aren't as responsive, and the layout and the browsing features, it's just not quite as streamlined, especially compared to Push 3. And it has no MPE, no I/O, no inputs or outputs, and obviously is not standalone. Okay, now let's shift over to Push 3, pros and cons. Some of the pros, the MPE response on these pads and the pads in general, I'm telling you, are next level. If you love playing pad controllers and you want to play this like an instrument, this is your go-to. Like, this is what it's about. right? Another pro is that it has intense IO. It has outputs, it has ADAT expandability, it has 2 main outs, it has 2 inputs, it has MIDI in and out, CV out, pedals, like you name it. It has all sorts of inputs and outputs, which Push 2 has basically none of. And of course, it is standalone. And that just makes Push 3 totally portable, which is crazy if you think about it. Another pro is that it does have an improved workflow, especially if I'm working away from the computer. Everything just feels so much more intuitively laid out. They really did a good job. The button placement, the feel of the buttons, navigating with the encoders themselves feel more smooth. Everything just feels really good in terms of a workflow on Push 3. Another pro is that it is actually an instrument. I used to hesitate when calling Push 2 an instrument because you still had to be plugged in to a computer and have Ableton running to generate sounds, and it didn't have any output. Like, you still had to have an audio interface. So it was kind of a whole setup for it to be an instrument. But Push 3 is an instrument because it has all that stuff built in the standalone version. So I'm calling this thing what it is. It is an instrument. Another pro is that it has that optional upgrade option. So if you decide that you want to go for the controller only version and upgrade to standalone later, or have the option to do that later, they gave you that option by selling upgrade kits where you can just plug in a hard drive and RAM or whatever it is on the back end to make it standalone, which is amazing. And also another pro is that they've made this future proof by making those components upgradable in the future. So down the road, you can upgrade the RAM processor, you can upgrade the memory, and this thing will probably stand the test of time because it's been future proofed with those upgradable parts. The biggest con for Push 3 in general is the damn price. It's over $2,000, which is a massive investment. So it has to be the right fit for you to justify that price. So if you're just looking for a super integrated controller for Ableton to control tracks, effects, clips, and nothing else, you cannot go wrong with Push 2. It's way cheaper and most of the core features are the same. Now, if you're looking to play MPE, if you like to play instruments and you want to use its I/O capabilities, recording audio, sampling audio, being a studio Swiss Army knife, controlling modular gear, etc., then Push 3 has to be your go-to. For me, it's been definitely the pads and playing Push 3 as a standalone instrument and potentially using it to perform live has made it an absolute hell yes for me. But again, it depends on what kind of user you are and what you're looking to get out of a Push controller, whether it be the Push 2 or Push 3. If you're interested in learning everything Push 3 can do, I invite you to check out this video that I made covering absolutely everything you need to know to master and understand Push 3 inside and out in 1 hour. So if you want to check that out, I'll link it in the card above. All right, so I will see you in that next video.